Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mary Price, the Events and Marketing Director at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University. Today we have Norbert Majerus, a Shingo Faculty Fellow, and Brian Abraham, who is a faculty member at Nichols College, a research fellow at Case Western Reserve, and co-founder of ARI with us today. In our newsletter earlier this month, we published an article called You Can Be Lean and Creative, which is the topic that we're discussing today. You can read that article by going to shingo.org/articles. Norbert, I will turn the time over to you and you can introduce Brian when he joins us. Thank you.
Yeah, well, what I want to start with, this webinar is about a publication then that finally got accepted at International Journal for Lean Six Sigma, together with other submissions about the Shingo model. And want to do a little summary of that article today, but I can't go into any of the details, so I just picked a few highlights that I want to cover. We all know the Shingo model, and we all know the Shingo model from its application, manufacturing, healthcare, and many other applications. But if you really go down and read the details, the Shingo model is based on principles, on real lean principles. And we all know the principles apply everywhere at any time. So why would they not apply to a process that is actually supposed to enhance innovation, or even where the main business model is innovation? I'm not talking about product innovation here only, but I'm talking about any innovation, any new ideas that we can bring up into any of the work that we do with Lean. And of course, you all know innovation is a big change, just like starting a new Lean initiative is a big change. And things don't always go totally smooth if you make a big change. And in fact, when I started a Lean initiative in the Goodyear Innovation Center, one of our most well-known and prominent innovators, his name is Sam, and Sam said, this is not going to work. This will kill our innovation. Innovation can't have standards. Innovation can't have a process. But, and actually I invited Sam to this call, but he had a doctor's appointment. But anyway, at the end of his career, Sam had completely changed his mind. And that thought is out there, and it's actually a prominent thought out there, that lean thinking and all the standardization, standard work, and you name it, will kill the innovation. And one of the first speeches that I ever gave on innovation excellence, I was just getting started, and a senior executive from one of the biggest consumer goods companies stood up and said, "Lean is a bunch of baloney." He said, I'm here to tell you, don't even think about using it in context of your innovation. It will do nothing for you, and it will kill your innovation. Well, okay, my speech at that time, I could have just sat down, of course, but we know better now. And as I said, I tried to summarize this and try to show that a good lean system is also a good, is also setting up the right culture for a good innovation system. And the reason I mentioned this example is, when I started then to implement Lean in the Innovation Center, on the work that we did on the creating innovative products, one of our senior directors, actually the one who was in charge of product development, the one who was supposed to foster the innovation, he's the one who said, "No, we can't do this. There's too much of a risk here. This could kill our. This could lead to us being late or other problems that we could have." And he wanted no piece of it. And that's just the way it takes sometimes people to a longer time to realize the benefits overall that could go wrong. And I forgot to mention, I spent the first 20 years of my career developing innovation, inventing new things and validating them and making them work. And I almost got fired, and I'm not kidding. I almost got fired for a new product that I developed and validated. The senior executive of that division, he could not handle that idea of such a revolutionary product. And his answer was that he said, if this continues, I will fire you and everybody else who supports this idea. Well, there's a way to kill innovation, right? But unfortunately, a lot of colleagues trying to do lean didn't get much further than that either. So, Brian, thanks for joining us. Maybe I should introduce Brian. Now, Brian actually co-authored the article with me, and I was happy about that. He taught me how to write an article with peer reviews. Brian is a professor at Nichols College in Massachusetts, and also has still some ties with Case Western, but off the top of my head, I forgot what that is. But anyway, Brian, why don't you take it over and talk about the change in a major lean transformation?
Yeah, so thank you, Norbert. It's good to see you. Sorry, I was a few moments late. So my biggest interest in lean and Shingo is as it intersects with traditional organizations and how organizations operate. So for example, if we go all the way back to Peter Drucker, we go back to Clay Christensen, we look at innovation, we look at their different thoughts on innovation, we look at ways in which some companies seem to be able to constantly innovate effectively over a period of time. And it's typically only over a period of time, and then something happens. And why is it that some companies can do that, and what prevents other companies from doing that? And so I'd be curious, Norbert, and your thoughts on it, vis-a-vis what Drucker has to say, what Christensen has to say, and what others have studied, on this topic. What are the impediments?
Yeah, there is a big hurdle to get over, and I gave you examples of it. And I came to the conclusion that people don't like new ideas because they are afraid. It's fear. And what kind of fear? It's not so much what happens to the company. It's almost always what fear for their personal career. Today, leaders are very short. They go to many different assignments for a very short period of time. And this would be the last thing they would want to support for the short time that they're in a job. The consequences can be so totally outweigh the benefits for their own career. To me, that's a big one. And then the other one, and I told you the example where I almost got fired for a new idea, but it's the culture that that the companies have been extremely risk adverse and conservative. But actually, I think that a culture based on respect for people and then also humble leadership really sets the foundation for what I call psychological safety. It lets you suggest things that may not be all the way developed. It lets you suggest things with a little bit of a risk to it. And by the way, we also learned very well how to manage that with lean startup thinking and many tools that came along in the last few years. So Brian, I can turn it over back to you now, and about can leaders force people to be innovative.
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic, for sure. So if we take a look at the diffusion of innovation, just generally speaking, I think we can all agree that with the internet, some other advents of communication and international diplomacy, that the diffusion of innovations is speeding up quite a bit. However, there are studies out there. There was one study that I read not too long ago that indicated that internal corporate innovation programs tend to have an average lifespan of 4 years. And at the end of 4 years, they're disbanded. And some authors point toward leadership changes, some point toward economic stress, some point toward uh, ineffective innovation programs and being canceled. Um, However, the average time an innovation program is canceled and then a new one pops up within the same organization is approximately 18 months. So after they abandon it, they come back to it again about a year and a half later. And that's in some large publicly traded companies that have been studied. Now, having said that, you've seen a lot of these initiatives, Norbert, and especially in some companies. Google comes to mind, and a few others, where the culture that has been established and formed seem to foster longer term investment in innovation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that is a very good point, Brian. And leaders can really not force innovation, even though I went through many incentives like rewarding ideas or whatever, but they never really worked. I think leaders can only set the stage and help innovation with the environment and the culture they create. And one of the best examples for that I've ever seen was at Google in Sunnyvale, California. You walk through these offices, and every 100 yards, the scenery completely changes. There is sunlight in there, everything, the walls look different. There are minimum viable products hidden everywhere, and you're encouraged to look at them, to comment on them, and so on. And I contrast that. I work for a very innovative company, by the way. But our offices, you walk from one end to the other, a mile through there, and everything is exactly the same. You're not allowed to put anything on the wall. Everything is white, and you are not allowed to display anything. Maybe who knows who can see it, and so on. Google is of the opinion the more people see it, the more feedback we get, the better the product will be. And I even got to ride the bike, the meeting bike at Google, where 6 people ride a bike together, sit in a circle, and while they ride the bike over their campus, they brainstorm. So a far cry there, even though, as I said, and I work for a very innovative company, so I hate to think how it looks at companies who never do any innovation. So, you can tell us how the Shingo model plays into that culture, Brian.
Yeah, well, the Shingo model needs to be embedded, of course, directly into the organization. It needs to be embraced from the top down, and there needs to be a lot of pervasive attention to it. Culture doesn't change overnight, and I think we can all recognize that. And it's interesting to me that I've seen a lot of different companies, and a lot of companies get criticized because they are not nimble. And I certainly understand that criticism. However, we need to look at each company individually. For example, my years at Battelle Memorial Institute in Ohio. Some would say that at Battelle we were not nimble. People would say that making change at Patel was like turning an aircraft carrier. And that's a common saying in the lingo parlance. However, if you look at it carefully, Battelle Memorial Institute is absolutely, hands down, bar none, world class in servicing U.S. government programs. World class. I would argue nobody does it better. So they pay all their attention toward doing the best they can to serve their current customer set at a world-class level, which sometimes could mean that their aperture is a little bit narrow and not necessarily able to see other opportunities that come up along the lines of what Christensen talked about with disruptive innovation and things of that nature. Having said that, the leaders need to really embrace the role of planting the right kind of seeds and putting the right kinds of programs in place. And there are a lot of good programs out there, and there are some other programs that maybe aren't so good, in my opinion. A not so good program would be a program, I won't name companies, but a program where if a company allows their employees 5 hours a week to be innovative, that to me seems a little short-sighted. It's not as though you can work 35 hours a week and your last 5 hours on the job on a Friday, now you're going to flip the switch and be innovative. That doesn't work. That's not embracing lean and Shingo at all. It's it really needs to be part of the actual culture itself, and there needs to be really a system of continuous improvement. You can't, in my opinion, you cannot take somebody else's model from some other company, implant it in your company, because your company is not the same. It's different. And you need to start from look at the best practices and then start on a continuous improvement program that over time will embed the Shingo model within the organization. So you see this yourself with these continuous improvement programs.
Yeah, well, thank you, Brian, for sharing that. Really, you do innovation or you do lean actually by engaging the people that do the work, and that is something that I have I saw that happening in Cleveland at a medical care provider. Actually, they were doing. Like the kidney failure problems, like not the dialysis, really bad, and not bad. I mean, a very tough job for nurses, and they had an unbelievable turnaround, and they had a terrible culture. When you walked in that place, you thought you were in a prison or some hospital or something. And the new chairman, he said, we started an innovation initiative. And no training, nothing, just supporting the people. And all they did is engage the people to make the changes. If you see something bad, come and talk to me. We'll give you the resources that you can go out and fix it, and we'll coach you and we'll support you to do that. And I had an opportunity to see that company a few years ago, and it was an unbelievable change in the turnover. They didn't have those problems anymore. It had become a great culture, and it all happened by just engaging the people into the daily work that they were doing. So, Brian, tell us a little bit about the focus that also belongs to this.
Yeah, so even harkening back to you've worked your 35 hours on the job this week. Now you have 5 hours to be creative. The the random creativity. you can occasionally be creative, but don't do it all the time. Is highly problematic for sure, and it really needs to be a focus on it. There has to be a process and a focus, and it's not that creativity and innovation um, are opposite of frameworks and strategies and things of that nature. They work hand in hand. We've sort of seen this in different cases that we've looked at over the years. I know you've been knee deep in it longer than I have. What's a good example that you've seen in your work?
Uh, Random creativity works just as well as random kaizens, and we all know that data works so well, and that's why the Shingo model promotes the constancy of purpose and the strategy and the Hoshin Kenri, whatever you call it. And that's a prerequisite to any successful transformation. And for example, what I like to do, you do brainstorming. So again, you probably all heard about brainstorming. So they go everywhere. You're supposed to go everywhere, no limitations. And then you end up with stuff that is totally crazy, wouldn't work anyway. And I always like to take the cowboard strategy and bring it back down to reality. And at the end, say, okay, how can we take all these great ideas now and see how we can focus them on on something that is feasible in the next few years in this company. So Brian, we're getting short here on time. So why don't we just jump to the culture part, and why don't you tell us a little bit about the culture, and we'll finish on that part.
Yeah, well, as we discussed, culture doesn't form overnight, and unfortunately, as we've mentioned throughout this webinar so far, the you mentioned it with the short-sightedness of a lot of organizations, the being slave to quarterly earnings and things of that nature, can at times be at odds with having the bravery to stick with a cultural um, uh, uh, embeddedness. It does take bravery from the top down, in my opinion. Bravery, of course, respect, and it's just like any other program. If you implement a program within an organization, you don't go into it lightly. It's an investment. There's a lot of training, and it has to be something that's pervasive, and that's every bit as true with the Shingo method as it is with any other program that you're embedding within a system. And the pervasiveness is something that to me is one of the more important aspects of things. It can't be a flavor of the week type of a thing. It has to be something that is uh, supported, embedded, and grown over time.
Well, I agree. And let me just here very briefly summarize. For me, what I learned in this quite long reflection here is that a lean culture and an innovative culture are almost perfect overlap. And the other thing that I learned very clearly is that the culture that the Shingo model promotes, based on respect for every individual, humble leadership, is a perfect fit to create a great innovative culture. So if you want to think differently, don't change. And if you're already applying Shingo model, just be creative. Just try to work on the few things, eliminate fear and a few things like that. And don't hesitate to come up with new things. Now, I want to, for the call to action now, before we get to questions, you all gonna have obstacles in your lean transformation, and in your innovation creation, you always get the obstacles. So here's something, a little advice if you hit an obstacle like that. Think about what's the absolute worst thing that could happen. And then maybe come up with a little experiment. It doesn't have to cost much, it doesn't take much. How can I mitigate this obstacle? How can I eliminate it or work around it or whatever? And in many cases, you may see this is very difficult to do. But in that case, don't throw everything away. Just follow Eric Ries, and he says, then pivot. Just turn a little bit, go a little bit in a different direction and see where that takes you. And you may find out at the end, hey, this goes nowhere. And that's okay. Failure is part of this process. Just go to something else and find some great improvement someplace else. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to a few questions. If we have the time here, we should have a few minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. We do have a couple questions. Our first question is, have you used TRIZ, T-R-I-Z, as an innovation tool?
Of course I have, and it's a great tool. It comes from Russia, and it's a great tool. But Mary, it's like always, the tools are not going to get you there. If you use the tool at the right place with the right understanding, the right principles and so on, they work for you. But to just throw in trees out there and think that solves all your innovation problems, then maybe pushing it a little bit. But if you work on something that seems to get you somewhere, it's a wonderful tool to organize and to broaden everything. I would recommend it. I used it many times at the right place. It does great things for you.
Perfect. Thank you. We have one more question. Chuck asks, have you found that workplaces with a union-backed workforce has a negative effect on creativity?
I hate to use the business professor classic phrase, it depends. But it does depend a fair amount. I think in situations where unions are aligned with management, it's much easier and smoother. I think in situations where there is a lack of alignment, there's going to be a lot of difficulty. Here's a classic example. If a company decides to put an innovation group together within the organization itself and have as a standalone innovation center that is not linked to other aspects of the other company, then the people who are on the front lines, on the manufacturing line, on the shipping and receiving line, wherever the functional lines are of the company, there's going to be a natural animosity that develops between that innovation group and the rest of the company, because the rest of the company will be thinking, why do they get to go off in a sandbox and play while we're hard at work driving revenue for this organization? So putting it within an organization in a standalone unit that is not integrated with the rest of the organization is asking for trouble. In the unions, again, similar kind of notion, they have to be in alignment with the rest of the organization for it to work well.
I can only echo that, Brian. And anyway, if we don't answer your questions, please, Mary will send them to me. I will answer them in an email. If you can get lean to work in a union environment, you will get innovation to work in the union environment, because it's all about respect and collaboration and all those good things.
Thank you. We don't have any other questions, so that was perfect timing. Thank you so much, Brian and Norbert. That was great. It was wonderful just to hear your different perspectives on lean and innovation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.